Hey, this is Dave DeCamp from antiwar.com. This is anti-war news for Friday, August 22nd, 2025. All right, the first story at the top of antiwar.com today. IDF database suggests 83% of Gaza dead are civilians. So this was a big report that came out from 972 magazine on Thursday. They published it jointly with The Guardian. So it's by Yuval Abraham. This is an Israeli reporter with Israeli sources, and he's done a lot of the big investigations that have revealed a lot about the way Israel has been conducting this war, conducting this genocide, which I think his reporting has made very clear that that's what this is. Anyway, so data from an internal Israeli intelligence database indicates that at least 83% of Palestinians killed in Israel's onslaught on Gaza were civilians. An investigation by 972 can reveal. Figures obtained from the classified database, which records the deaths of militants from Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad, contradict by a huge margin the public statements of Israeli army and government officials throughout the war, which have generally claimed a 1-to-1 or 2-to-1 ratio of civilian to militant casualties. Instead, the classified data backs up the findings of several studies suggesting Israel's bombardment of Gaza has killed civilians at a rate with few parallels in modern warfare. The Israeli army confirmed the existence of the database, which is managed by the Military Intelligence Directorate, known by the Hebrew acronym Amman. Multiple intelligence sources familiar with the database said the army views it as the only authoritative tally of militant casualty figures. In the words of one of them, there's no other place to check. The database includes a list of 47,653 names of Palestinians in Gaza who Amman considers to be active in the military wings of Hamas and PIJ. According to the sources, the list is based on the group's own internal documents acquired by the army, which 972 says they were not able to verify. The database designates 34,973 of the names as operatives of Hamas and 12,702 as operatives of Islamic Jihad. According to the data, which was obtained in May of this year, the Israeli army believed that it had killed around 8,900 operatives since October 7th, the deaths of 7,330 of whom were considered certain, and 1,570 recorded as probably dead. The vast majority of them were junior, with the army suspecting it had killed 100 to 300 senior Hamas operatives out of a total of 750 named in the database. A source familiar with the database explained that a specific piece of intelligence is attached to the name of every operative on the list whom the army is sure it killed, justifying that designation. So the overall death tolls published daily by the Gaza Health Ministry, which Local Call, which is 972's Hebrew language outlet, they revealed last year. They had a report citing Israeli sources that said the Gaza Health Ministry numbers are considered reliable even by the Israeli military. And as we have discussed a lot, and as is mentioned in this report, there have been several studies now that have determined the Gaza Health Ministry numbers are likely a significant undercount. So anyway, so the Gaza Health Ministry list, it does not distinguish between civilians and militants, but taking the militant casualty figures obtained from the internal Israeli army database in May and lining them up against the health ministry's total death toll, it is possible to calculate an approximate civilian casualty ratio for the war up until 3 months ago when the death toll stood at 53,000. Assuming that all of the certain and probable militant deaths were counted in the death toll, that would mean over 83% of Gaza's dead were civilians. If the probable deaths are discounted and only the certain deaths included, the proportion of civilian deaths rises to more than 86%. The intelligence sources explain that the total number of militants killed is likely higher than the number recorded in the internal database, since it did not include Hamas or PIJ operatives who were killed but could not be identified, or Palestinians in Gaza who took part in fighting but were not officially members of Hamas or PIJ. or political figures in Hamas that Israel also considers legitimate targets in violation of international law. However, that does not mean that the ratio of civilian casualties is lower than calculated above. In fact, it could be even higher. Again, so they're saying, and this is what the Hasburists, the pro-Israel people's response to this report is, this is BS because that number of Hamas and PIJ militants only includes the one they identified. They haven't identified everybody they killed. And what this report is explaining is that, yes, the real number is probably a little higher, but the Gaza Health Ministry number is probably actually significantly higher. And then the other thing is, with this so-called war, I saw one of these guys, pro-Israel propagandist guys, make a video saying, calling it blood libel and saying, the IDF doesn't identify every Hamas guy that it kills, in a battle, in a gun battle. But the majority, I would say probably the vast majority of people that have been killed in airstrikes, in targeted airstrikes. Well, when I say targeted, I mean that's been the IDF's justification for all these bombings. They claim that they, in all these strikes, they know who they're targeting. They identify everybody that they're targeting. So, and there was actually a report from 972, I think it was one of their first ones about all this, in November 2023, that quoted a source in the IDF who said, we know every person that we kill. If a 3-year-old girl is killed, that's because we decided she should be killed. It was worth the collateral damage. And they frame it as collateral damage, but when you're intentionally killing so many civilians, I mean, it's not collateral damage. But so anyway, so again, that is the pro-Israel people's response to this is saying, oh, there's no way that this is the final, full death toll of Hamas and PIJ guys. But again, with the health ministry numbers, every indication is that their numbers are significantly low. So it's like both lists are of people that have been fully identified, essentially. So anyway, and why I think this is important is because these statistics, and I interviewed Matthew Cockerell, the historian who goes by History Speaks on Twitter, about this, because I think it's important. His work has kind of focused on these numbers, and he found, that the civilian casualty rate, that the rate of women and children being killed, it's not comparable to any modern conflict unless you go back to the Rwandan genocide. And I think that it's really revealing when you see these numbers compared to other conflicts. There has been no other conflict in the 21st century with numbers like this. So it goes to show this is not a war. This is a different thing that's happening here in Gaza. So if people haven't watched that interview, it's interesting. And I think this report vindicates a lot of what Matthew has been talking about and focusing on. But there's more details in here, and they get into how, over the past couple of years, we've seen, it's been almost 2 years now since October 7th, but we've seen the claim, like some IDF officials have been claiming that they've killed 20,000 Hamas guys. And this gets into basically saying that it's a lie. And they actually have an IDF general who goes on the record saying they lie all the time about this stuff. And, you've had some of the most loyal Hasburists trying to claim for a long time that it was like a 1-to-1 civilian to combatant ratio, which anybody with two eyes, you see the aftermath of these airstrikes, that is just not true at all. But I would recommend going and giving the full report, read through it. It's really important, I think. Again, just comparing it to other conflicts, I think really reveals a lot. All right, so the next one here, Netanyahu plans Gaza takeover regardless of deal with Hamas. So Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said in an interview released on Thursday that Israel will take over the Gaza Strip whether or not Hamas agrees to a ceasefire deal. The interview with Sky News Australia appears to have been recorded before Hamas had publicly accepted the latest ceasefire proposal from mediators Qatar and Egypt, which was virtually identical to one that Israel had previously accepted. Netanyahu was asked by the interviewer if he still planned to take over Gaza and eliminate the terrorists if Hamas accepted a deal. That was the question he was asked by the Sky News Australia interviewer, which Sky News Australia is like particularly pro-Israel. And Netanyahu's reply was, quote, "We're going to do that anyway. That there was never a question that we're not going to leave Hamas there," end quote. So also on Thursday, Netanyahu said that he was going to approve the Israeli military's plans to take over Gaza City, which involved the ethnic cleansing of over 1 million Palestinians there. And he said he visited the Israeli military's Gaza division headquarters, and he said that he was there to approve those plans. Another thing, he said that he ordered the start of negotiations. And the wording here, I can see what he's doing. So Netanyahu said, quote, "At the same time, I have instructed to immediately begin negotiations for the release of all our hostages and the end of the war under conditions acceptable to Israel," end quote. So notice what he says there. He says the release of all hostages. The deal that Hamas accepted was they would release 10 Israelis and there'd be a 60-day ceasefire, which was, according to the Times of Israel, it's the identical framework of what Israel accepted earlier this summer. But now Netanyahu is saying, they all have to be released, even though the issue before was that Israel didn't want to agree to the long-term deal and that Hamas wanted the permanent ceasefire. But Netanyahu's also saying here that they're going to take over Gaza no matter what. So that's not giving Hamas any... It just seems like he's clearly trying to just make sure a deal doesn't happen here. And Dropsite News has a report basically saying Hamas made significant concessions toward the Israeli position, and it gets into the details of how they did that. They accepted, that IDF is not going to pull out of certain areas, but it just doesn't seem like this deal is going to go anywhere because the U.S. is not putting any pressure on Netanyahu to make the deal, and he's just, he clearly doesn't want to do it. All right, so the next one here, Huckabee claims that West Bank settlements are not illegal. So Huckabee has said this, I think, a couple times in the past week or so. I just wanted to write a story on it because I think it's important. Kind of just the insanity of having Mike Huckabee as the U.S. ambassador to Israel. So U.S. ambassador to Israel Mike Huckabee claimed in an interview on Thursday that Israeli settlements in the Israeli-occupied West Bank were not illegal under international law. Comments that came after Israel approved a major expansion of settlements. Huckabee told Al Arabiya that, quote, "It is not a violation of international law for Israelis to live in Judea and Samaria," end quote. And he's using the biblical name there for the West Bank. And historically, it has been the position of U.S. administrations to oppose Israeli settlements, but that changed with the first Trump administration. In 2019, then Secretary of State Mike Pompeo declared that the U.S. no longer considered settlements illegal under international law, despite their clear prohibition under the Geneva Convention. It's very clear. Article 49 of the Geneva Conventions states, quote, "The occupying power shall not deport or transfer parts of its own civilian population into the territory that it occupies," end quote. So both the U.S. and Israel have signed and ratified the Geneva Conventions of 1949. So Huckabee, he's a Christian Zionist who believes that God gave historic Palestine to the modern state of Israel, a view that is not accepted by most Christians, including my Catholic Church. So anyway, Huckabee has a long record of supporting the Israeli occupation and takeover of the West Bank, and even denies that Israel is an occupying power. This is one of his greatest hits from an interview in 2017 when he was visiting a settlement in the occupied West Bank. Huckabee said, quote, "I think Israel has title deed to Judea and Samaria. There are certain words I refuse to use. There's no such thing as a West Bank. It's Judea and Samaria. There's no such thing as a settlement. Their communities, their neighborhoods, their cities. There's no such thing as an occupation," end quote. And tell that to the Palestinians living under it. And back in 2008, Huckabee was recorded saying that there's no such thing as a Palestinian, basically saying, oh, these are just Arabs in this part of the world. And he argued that the Palestinians should be expelled to other Arab states. So that's back in 2008, him saying that there's no such thing as a Palestinian. I haven't seen him actually say that recently, but recently, he's made the argument as the U.S. ambassador to Israel that the Palestinians should move into one of the Arab states. They'd say, oh, the Arabs got all this land, send the Palestinians there. And so I just think it's important, to highlight the fact that a very influential, the spokesman for the U.S. government in Israel, the leading representative, has this view based on his erroneous interpretation of the Bible. And this is what's driving his. And, when he says things like this, when it's clear that the U.S. administration supports the occupation of the West Bank and the stealing of the Palestinian land, I mean, this emboldens the settlers. And we've seen all the settler violence just seems to be getting worse and worse. And so he also said something interesting. He said that, Israel's expanding settlements because of the European countries who are announcing that they're going to recognize a Palestinian state. Huckabee said, quote, "I don't know what the Europeans thought they were going to accomplish, but through their actions, they are accomplishing something they didn't want. Essentially give a green light to the Israelis to take more pieces of Judea and Samaria, either by sovereignty or annexation," end quote. And of course, this comes after the expansion of the E1 settlement that Bezalel Smotrich said is going to erase the idea of a Palestinian state. And, what Huckabee is essentially doing there is giving them the green light as the U.S. ambassador that, this is a totally reasonable response to these countries recognizing a Palestinian state, is take more land, expand the settlements. We don't care. We're not going to stop you. We're going to keep giving you all the military aid. So that's very clearly the signal from this Trump administration. All right, so the next one here, the IDF kills 70 Palestinians in Gaza over 24 hours. So the daily violence, of course, in Gaza continues. So Gaza's health ministry said on Thursday that Israeli attacks killed 70 Palestinians and wounded 356 over the previous 24-hour period, as U.S.-backed Israeli attacks continue across the Strip amid IDF plans to significantly escalate its genocidal war. The Israeli military has continued heavy attacks on Gaza City as it's preparing an offensive to conquer the city. The Palestinian news agency Wafa reported that one attack on the Sabra neighborhood in Gaza City on Thursday killed at least 8 Palestinians, including 4 children. Another strike on Sabra killed 3 Palestinians, and Israeli shelling on the Sheikh Radwan neighborhood killed 1 child and injured several more. So Israel's plans for the takeover involve forcibly displacing the more than 1 million Palestinian civilians sheltering there. And while thousands have fled amid the heavy bombardment, many are staying, and they are defiant in the face of the Israeli plans to take over the city. There's actually a big protest in Gaza City, and this is a picture from that, of Palestinians carrying signs saying, "Stop the war, stop the genocide, save Gaza." Some of them carried signs that said no to displacement. They're saying, we don't want to go. We've had enough. And this is a woman, Bizal Ghazal, a displaced woman in Gaza City, told the Associated Press, quote, "We want the war on Gaza to stop. We don't want to migrate. 22 months, it's enough. Enough death, enough destruction," end quote. So Israeli strikes hit other parts of Gaza on Thursday, including a tent camp in Deir el-Balah in the central part of the Strip. According to the AP, the IDF warned Palestinians before the strike, and the attack completely destroyed the camp with no reports of casualties. But there's a huge crater, completely destroyed it. It's rare that they give warning for bombings these days, what they did in this case, according to the AP report. And then they continue to kill Palestinians attempting to get food aid. At least 18 were killed in this 24-hour period. And so the death toll, I think I said yesterday, of the death toll of people trying to get food, of aid seekers since the end of May, I mean, in like less than 3 months, is 2,036. I mean, it's just absolutely horrific. All right, so the next one here, famine officially declared in Gaza for first time by UN-backed group. So this article is from The Telegraph. I just saw this not too long ago. So famine will be declared in Gaza City for the first time by the international body responsible for monitoring world hunger. The Telegraph can reveal the UN-backed Integrated Food Security Phase Classification, a globally recognized system for classifying the severity of food insecurity and malnutrition, has been used to declare just 4 famines since it was established in 2004, most recently in Sudan last year. Although the IPC has previously warned famine is imminent in parts of Gaza, it has until now stopped short of making a formal declaration, citing a lack of hard data. However, on Friday morning, it will formally declare a famine in Gaza City, the last remaining major built-up area of Gaza and home to some 500,000 people. The declaration will outrage the Israeli government, which has consistently denied that famine is taking place in Gaza and is currently moving on Gaza City. Benjamin Netanyahu said on Thursday that he would give final approval for the takeover of the city. And in order to declare a famine, 3 criteria must be met. At least 20% of households face an extreme lack of food. At least 30% of children suffer acute malnutrition. And 2 people for every 10,000 die each day due to outright starvation. I should have mentioned the health ministry said that Gaza hospitals recorded another 2 starvation deaths. So the IPC will state that a famine is taking place in the Gaza governorate, which comprises of Gaza City, 3 surrounding towns, and several refugee camps. So this is something that is going to hopefully increase the pressure on Israel to not go ahead with this major escalation of trying to conquer Gaza City. Doesn't seem like the U.S. is going to be putting pressure on them, but there's certainly going to be more international pressure and outrage over their plans to really escalate. All right, so the next one here, Putin's conditions for a peace deal with Ukraine. So Reuters reported on Thursday that Russia's demands for a peace deal in Ukraine include Ukrainian forces withdrawing from the Donbass, a guarantee that Ukraine won't join NATO, and for Ukraine to keep Western troops out of the country. Russian sources told Reuters that Putin had compromised on his initial conditions, which included the Ukrainian withdrawal from the territory in the southern Kherson and Zaporozhye oblasts. Under the current offer, Russia is willing to freeze the lines there, and this is what the other reports have said. And they're also willing to return the small amounts of territory that Russia controls in Kharkiv and Sumy and in like northeastern Ukraine. Zelensky has publicly rejected the idea of ceding the territory to Ukrainian forces. He's rejected the idea of ceding territory that Ukrainian forces still control. One of his aides seemed to suggest that they'd be willing to freeze the lines, which is a concession because, of course, Zelensky's position has been, we're not going to stop until we take back all the territory. But I think this is right. I mean, this is kind of what I've gathered from Russia's position. Again, they want the Donbass, no NATO, and no Western troops in Ukraine. And I think that's really going to be the big sticking point in what could make these negotiations fall apart is this push for security guarantees. So when it comes to NATO, the Trump administration has said that Ukraine is not joining NATO as part of any peace deal. But you still see like Mark Rutte, the NATO Secretary General, just this week, he said Ukraine is on an irreversible path to NATO membership. They're still pushing this. And when it comes to the territory, the Europeans are backing Zelensky's position that, no, we're not going to give up the Donbass. And then the Western troops thing, I mean, that's their whole thing right now is, I mean, it's like every day this week, there's been some statement from the UK or some grouping saying, we're going to send troops to Ukraine, basically. So I think this deal that Russia is offering, I think it's workable. If Trump really needs to have the conviction to pursue it, which I don't think he really does. And then at the same time, would he, like, even if he really wanted to do it, would he be able to do it, by putting the pressure on Ukraine, basically saying we're going to cut off all the weapons and intelligence. I mean, I think that would be enough to end the war because the Europeans are reliant on that stuff as well. So unfortunately, there's signs from Trump that he's not really going to squeeze them to make the deal. So the next one here, Trump signals support for Ukrainian attacks on Russian territory. So President Trump on Thursday suggested that he supports Ukrainian attacks on Russian territory in a provocative post on Truth Social, which came about a week after his summit with Putin. So the president wrote, quote, "It is very hard, if not impossible, to win a war without attacking an invader's country. It's like a great team in sports that has a fantastic defense but is not allowed to play offense. There is no chance of winning. It is like that with Ukraine and Russia. Crooked and grossly incompetent Joe Biden would not let Ukraine fight back, only defend. How did that work out? Regardless, this is a war that would never happen if I were president. Zero chance. Interesting times ahead," end quote. So, Biden gave Ukraine the green light to hit Russian territory with American-provided missiles last year. And that was a huge escalation. Russia responded by changing their nuclear doctrine and lowering the threshold for the use of nuclear weapons, really showing how serious that was. And then the other aspect of this is that all these Ukrainian drone attacks are ultimately supported by the U.S. The U.S. invested $1.5 billion in helping Ukraine's, start its domestic drone manufacturing program. The CIA was involved in that. And, there's been all sorts of reports saying that these Ukrainian drone attacks, they need U.S. NATO provided intelligence, which I think, that's pretty clear. So they do, it is all ultimately supported by the U.S. But when it comes to actually like American missiles striking Russian territory, it's kind of a different ball game, a different kind of, more open escalation. So the fact that Trump's talking about that is not great. All right, so the next one here, Zelensky wants Western security guarantees before Putin meeting. So another bad sign here. Zelensky is saying, he said on Thursday that he wants to have more clarity on what security guarantees the Western countries will give him before he agrees to meet with Putin. And what are they talking about? They're talking about sending troops to Ukraine. That's on the agenda. Trump has suggested that he backs it, that he would provide air power, air support. And Russia has made clear it's just a non-starter. And Russia's saying that they want to be involved in the talks on security guarantees. And again, I've mentioned this a lot, that back to that 2022 draft deal, there was some kind of security guarantee that would involve the 5 permanent members of the UN Security Council, which include the U.S. and Russia. Russia wants to be part of it. They want to say in it. So what Zelensky has in mind, is not going to work. One thing I don't think I mentioned, that Reuters report said that they're also discussing like a 3-way agreement between the U.S., Russia, and Ukraine. That's something Russia could go for. I don't know, like when they say security guarantees, it could mean a lot of different things. It could mean like the Article 5 mutual defense guarantee that you get with NATO, or it could mean, guarantees of, from Russia that they wouldn't do something in these conditions, or, whatever. There's just like, it could mean a lot of different things. But what they're talking about right now is European troops to be the security guarantee, which is just really crazy because it puts them into potential direct conflict with Russia. And obviously that's not going to happen. And Lavrov, the Russian foreign minister, said Thursday, he accused the European countries who are pushing and insisting on the troop deployment of trying to undermine the peace progress, which, I think is certainly possible that this whole thing is, they're trying to make it fall apart by pushing for this troop deployment. All right, so the next one here, Ukrainian accused of planning Nord Stream bombing arrested in Italy. So this one's from Kyle Anzalone. So a Ukrainian man who is accused of setting up the attack on the Nord Stream pipeline in 2022 was arrested in Italy. The bombings destroyed 3 of the 4 Nord Stream pipelines that brought energy from Russia to Germany. The man, only identified as Serhiy K., was arrested in Italy after Germany issued a warrant for his arrest on Monday. A statement from the German prosecutor general said that he was part of the team that destroyed the pipeline. Multiple sources have offered different theories for who destroyed the Nord Stream pipelines. Of course, there was the initial blame on Russia from the Western governments and the media over here, even though it just made no sense that Russia would blow up their own pipeline. And then there was the big report from Seymour Hersh, and he alleges that Joe Biden directed the bombing. And so his report came out, and then the narrative from the Washington Post, the New York Times came out, and they started blaming Ukrainians, this group of Ukrainians that they say rented a yacht and planted the explosives. I forget the exact details of Hersh's report, but his report says that U.S. Navy divers planted explosives on the pipeline during NATO drills in the summer, and then they were detonated in September of that year. But then the kind of, so essentially the official story is that the Ukrainians did it. And I'm sure if they did do it, they had help. So either way, not looking too good for the people who initially claimed it was Russia, which was obviously just nonsense at the time. But they arrested one guy. We'll see if this goes anywhere. All right, so the next one here, Israeli drones pound southern Lebanon, 1 killed. So this one's from Jason Ditz. So on Thursday, Israel launched a number of airstrikes against southern Lebanon. As they so often do, the IDF claimed that they were attacking Hezbollah infrastructure in the attacks, a claim reported without scrutiny by Israeli media outlets. The report suggests that the strikes mostly hit random civilian targets. However, a motorcyclist was attacked and killed in Deir Saran, the only confirmed fatality so far. Motorcyclists tend to get killed a lot in these attacks. There's an attack on an apartment building that wounded at least 7 residents, according to Lebanon's health ministry. And there's no statement from the IDF about that attack. So this comes as we've seen, the U.S. say, okay, you guys, now that Lebanon's agreed to disarm Hezbollah, even though I don't really see how they're going to do that, but now the U.S. is saying, okay, maybe Israel can fulfill the ceasefire deal that they signed last year, but they continue to bomb southern Lebanon. All right, so the last one here, India and Russia set a $100 billion trade target. So this article's from The Cradle. So India and Russia plan to increase their annual trade to $100 billion over the next 5 years, an increase of 50%, despite U.S. opposition to the growing cooperation between New Delhi and Moscow, a top Indian minister announced on August 21st. So this is during a 3-day visit to Moscow. India's external affairs minister emphasized the need for India and Russia to broaden their trade ties, foster additional joint ventures, and hold more frequent meetings to resolve issues such as payment systems. Russia ranks as India's 4th largest trade partner, while India holds the position of Russia's 2nd largest. And of course, this is going to show that this pressure from the U.S. is just not going to stop India from trading with Russia, or it's not going to make them reduce trade with Russia. And that's something hopefully Trump is realizing at this moment. I mean, there's got to be people in the administration who are aware of that. It was just a very foolish thing to try to do. And that's kind of the big threat. If the negotiations fall apart, we're going to put more tariffs on India and China. Like, that's going to affect Russia in any negative way. All right, so that is it for the news for today. Please go check out our viewpoints. One from Ted Galen Carpenter, giving Ukraine a U.S. security guarantee risks national suicide. One from Will Porter and Kyle Anzalone, is Venezuela the next target of the U.S. empire? One from Stavrula Pabst, Netanyahu's total victory, rhetoric takes an extreme turn. One from Francisco Rodriguez, sanctions can kill as many people as wars. And our spotlight is from Doug Bandow, Trump should keep U.S. out of any future Ukraine war. So please go check all that out. That's it for me for today. That's it for the week, right? Yeah, this is the last show of the week. So I hope everyone has a good weekend. You could always support this show by liking, subscribing, commenting. All that stuff helps out. Let's see, what else should I tell you? Nothing that I could really think of at the moment. So again, I hope everyone has a good weekend. Hopefully some positive things happen on the Gaza front, which is, it's hard to think that there will be, but there's always hope. Anyway, that is it for me for today. I will see you in a few days. Thanks for listening.